My guest today is Melissa Lamson, CEO of Lamson Consulting, which is one of the world's foremost intercultural trainer and consultant events. Her experience spans 2 decades and projects in more than 40 countries, affording her invaluable expertise in helping organizations expand globally, improve time to market, and increase profits. She has offered hundreds of companies the tools and insights to build successful leaders and effective teams in every corner of the world. Her past clients include LinkedIn, IKEA, MTV, Porsche, and SAP. Well, that's a pretty good list of clients. So welcome, Melissa. How are you?
Thank you very much, Dr. Carson. Doing very well, thank you.
Well, now, you talk about projects in more than 40 countries, and I've been fortunate. I've spoken and consulted in 50 countries. I'm not going abroad anymore because since I'm alone now, I don't like to leave my pets for that long a period of time. But you talk about being a global mindset expert. So what does that mean? What is global mindset?
Right. So global mindset is sort of, I would say, the next evolution of cultural diversity awareness, if you will. And that is, it's not only to understand how cultures behave in both life and business, but also to really understand how things function in different parts of the world. So to become really savvy at negotiating contracts and holding meetings and building relationships, perhaps supplier relationships, vendor relationships, acquiring customers, and all of those kinds of nuances that you need in order to really be effective in working in global environments. So the Thunderbird School of Management came up with a tool called the Global Mindset Inventory, and it assesses people on 3 different categories, which I think are absolutely relevant to kind of formally describing what global mindset is. And that is, there's intellectual capital, if you will. So how am I able to cognitively think and act in a global context? And then also social capital. And that is more about what is my intercultural ability to empathize and to develop relationships, my interpersonal impact. And then there's psychological capital, which is really about the will. Do I want to live abroad? Do I want to travel? Do I want to be in diverse environments? Do I want to understand how things work in a global context? And so I think those 3 pieces are really very relevant to what global mindset is on the whole.
Now, the companies that you're working with, that I've mentioned, are pretty large. So where do you come in with mid-sized companies? Are they interested in this as well? Are they as in tune, or are they more in tune than a larger company because a larger company has more layers and pieces to it?
Right, great question. So actually, a lot of the larger companies have fairly sophisticated programs in, I wouldn't say necessarily global mindset development, although some, but in cultural diversity awareness and diversity awareness in general. And so many of them actually don't necessarily think that they need to have sort of global mindset programming. Also, because those larger companies tend to already be global and be also successful globally, they don't necessarily see as much need for it. Where my business is really focusing now are those small and mid-sized companies that are in hyper-growth mode. So a lot of tech companies, for example, like LinkedIn, if you will, who's had tremendous growth over the last 3 years from 3,000 employees to now 15,000 employees. And expanding rapidly around the world. They see, for example, how critical it is to really get this idea of how to function in global environments and also do it quickly.
I think that's terrific. I think that's great that you're doing that. I think it's such a great positioning piece for you. So how did you get interested in this anyway? Because it is a unique field. People talk about working abroad and living abroad and wanting to travel abroad, but this is a unique field. So how did you first get into it?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's a long story, which I'm going to try to make shorter. But so I've always just been very interested. I traveled a lot with my family when I was younger. My father's a language professor, retired now. And so I was always kind of exposed to international and intercultural environments, and I found it super fascinating. And I did study abroad in college. I was in France, and it was just a great experience. And I think that when I started to do some reading, basically, I started my career in the art world, and I started to do reading about intercultural relationships and international awareness and business and so forth. And then I just started writing to some of these authors and saying, what is this and what do you do and what is an intercultural trainer and what is cross-cultural consulting? And, you mentioned that in your book. You mentioned that's what field you're in. And they said, oh, yeah, well, there's a couple programs in the U.S. that are available to do that, to get a further degree in it. And I'll give you, I'll let you know who's in the field, et cetera. And so I basically did a master's in intercultural relations that was at Lesley University. And actually my thesis advisor was Matt Damon's stepfather, which was kind of interesting. So right around the time when Good Will Hunting won the Oscar, right? And so it was kind of interesting because he actually went to the Oscars that year, but I didn't make it to go with him.
You couldn't convince him, huh?
Yeah. But anyway, he's a super interesting guy and has been in the field of intercultural relations for a long, long time. And so I kind of got introduced to everyone in that area of the world, in that industry. And then I started working for a woman named Patricia Arredondo, who's one of the founders of the field of cross-cultural psychology. And she had a very successful diversity practice in Boston, and so I worked with her company for a while. And then when I moved to Europe, because I wanted to have more of an international experience, I just decided I was going to move there and spend some time there. And I moved my business, and it just took off because no one was doing what I did. And so I was there for 10 years, and I grew the business, and then I ended up opening a second company that focused on diversity specifically in Europe. And it was one of the only companies that did that. So that's kind of the evolution of the business, if you will.
So what value do your clients get from your services?
Yeah. Well, they really learn very practically and tactically how to understand, empathize, and then deal, behave, act, function with other cultures in the context of these societies. In very, very in highly complex environments. So essentially they become much more savvy at global leadership. And they see that and they get it so quickly that they understand the value right away, which is why we can continue to run programs as much as we do. So it isn't too theoretical. It isn't something that needs like long-term planning or a long-term effect. It's really like quick, actionable, tangible takeaways that after a session, whether it's coaching, workshop, etc., webinar, that they can come away and immediately apply.
So I did a lot of work overseas in the 90s and then early 2000s.
Oh, wow.
What kind of differences do you see now? Because certainly people are much more aware with the internet and with global streaming and all of the things that are going on today. What are the differences? I mean, you spent 10 years in Europe. I'm not sure. Why did you decide to come back, first of all? And then what are the changes that you've seen since you started all of this?
That's right. Gosh, there are so many changes in some ways, and then there are sort of not in other ways. I mean, certainly from the perspective of where companies can be and how technology has sort of connected everyone everywhere. And even just generally that topic of connectivity is really growing. I mean, I just worked with an oil company whose primary locations are really kind of remote areas of Africa and Latin America. And I worked with them just on Monday. And they one of the main issues for them, 5, 10, 15 years ago certainly was connectivity, and now it's becoming such an easier process because of their ability to just even have technology in those locations and therefore be able to build plants and function there. But what's also very interesting, I think, that is not maybe or hasn't changed so much is that they still need to come in and sort of build an infrastructure. So they're actually hiring and training vendors to be able to supply parts and tools and everything that they need to build the refineries and to make the refineries function in these locations. And so that's something that I think has been a model that's been in place for many years and still exists today. But it certainly will be easier because technology is going to function much better in those locations now.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing.
And why did you come back to the U.S. though? I mean,
I came back to the U.S. for my personal life. I was really interested. I had met someone who was American, and I wanted to be based here with him. He wasn't in a place to move to Europe. So I still am in Europe 6 times a year, and I've spent a lot of time in the States while I was living in Europe. So because I travel about 80% of the time, I'm all over the place. So it doesn't really matter where I'm based. And I have to say, I really enjoy working for U.S.-based companies and helping them go global. I find that even in some ways more interesting than working for other companies based outside of the U.S. But I do kind of miss the European lifestyle. The European lifestyle is certainly quite nice, as you know.
Yes, I was going to say much more relaxed.
Pros and cons. That's right.
Well, love conquers all. So since you do so much travel, the question that women always ask is, how do you manage work-life balance?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just don't believe in it. So that helps. Because I think if you get too caught up in thinking I need work-life balance, then you're going to frustrate yourself. So really, I prefer to think of it as work-life management. And, it's not always easy. And certainly you'd have to ask all my partners and family just to really to say, I have to make sure that they're keeping me honest in this answer, but to see if I really do it well. But I think the key is that to really set the expectations, to say to work, hey, I'm really not going to be available in these times, and to say at home, hey, I'm not going to be available at these times. So you got to be willing to let something go and communicate why and when you have to let something go, because you just can't do it all. And I think one of the things with women is we're wired, and I just taught some advancement strategies for women workshops last week. And that was, of course, a big topic of conversation. And one of the things that we're kind of hardwired with is to try to do it all. And so we end up working not only one job, but we work the home job, the kids' job, the parents' job, the family job, and all these jobs that we take on and try to do them well. Because the other thing that women tend to have is a sense of perfectionism. And we're very critical of ourselves if we don't do things perfectly. And so between those two things, we can really hurt our work-life management, right, or our work-life feelings. And so I think it's really important for us to be able to let go, set expectations, delegate, and just make sure that we're not too hard on ourselves if we can't do everything perfectly.
Well, it's interesting because I think I talk about this a lot, and people ask me this question as well. And I personally, I think you can have work-life balance, but it's different for everybody. What works for you isn't going to work for me, and what works for you in an early marriage with little kids is not going to work when they're teenagers or when when they're out of the house. I mean, all of these things change, and you may like a work-life balance of 80% work and 20% life, and somebody else might say, hey, my job is 20% and my life is 80%. So I think there is a work-life balance, but it's different for everybody. So let me ask you, what is the most challenging thing about having your own business?
I think when you're very busy, keeping the pipeline full. So making sure that you have, you know what's coming in the next 6 months to a year, and ensuring that you're able to continue to build relationships and sustain relationships with future clients. that I would say is probably the most challenging. So if you start your own business, it takes time, of course,